In the restless heart of an African city where the sun rose each morning painting the tin rooftops gold, and where the shouts of market women mingled with the sharp calls of taxi conductors, lived a young man named Kwame whose life had become a journey measured not in miles, but in the countless faces that passed through the back seat of his battered yellow taxi, a taxi that was both his livelihood and his silent companion. The city was alive from dawn until long after dusk. Children ran barefoot across narrow lanes. Women balanced baskets of cassava and mangoes on their heads. Vendors pounded yam to the beat of their songs, and the air carried the mingled scents of roasted maize, fried plantains, and the red dust that clung to every street corner. In the midst of that rhythm sat Kwame, his strong hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the roads for passengers, his ears tuned to both the chatter of his customers and the quiet ache within him. For while the city brimmed with life, Kwame carried a silence so heavy it threatened to drown out the sounds of the world around him, the silence of his sister. Amma, the one person whose laughter had once filled his days, and whose absence now carved a hollow space in his chest that no amount of city noise could fill. Their bond had begun in the small village where they were born, a village surrounded by endless fields and guarded by a towering acacia tree under which they spent their childhood, weaving dreams into the wind, promising that no matter where life took them, they would remain side by side. They had run barefoot along dusty paths, their giggles trailing like music through the grass. They had whispered secrets in the soft glow of firelight while their grandmother told them stories of brave warriors and trickster hares. And they had sworn with the innocence of youth that nothing, not time, not distance, not hardship, could break the roots they shared. But when the rains came heavy one season, collapsing the fragile roof of their family hut and taking their parents with it, life forced them from the cradle of their childhood into the sharp claws of survival. Amma, with her quiet strength and gentle patience, chose to become a teacher, pouring herself into the children of the city whose hungry eyes reminded her of the siblings she and Kwame once were, while Kwame, less educated but determined, took to the roads as a taxi driver, finding dignity in the endless motion, carrying strangers through the labyrinth of the city's crowded streets. At first, despite the weight of survival, they clung to their bond, meeting every Sunday under the jacaranda tree near Amma's modest rented room, sharing roasted maize wrapped in newspaper, laughing at the endless quirks of city life, and for a few hours, pretending they were still those barefoot children under the acacia tree. They would talk about their parents, about their grandmother's stories, about the future they still dreamed of, and the jacaranda blossoms above them rained purple petals onto their shoulders like blessings from the ancestors. But slowly Sundays slipped away, stolen by exhaustion and the relentless demands of city life. Kwame's days grew longer, his nights shorter, the taxi meter ticking away the moments he wished he could spend with Amma. Amma, too, grew busier, her classroom overflowing with children, her evenings consumed with lesson plans and the unending hope of shaping a brighter tomorrow. One by one, their Sundays disappeared until the silence between them grew heavier than the humid evening air, until each unspoken goodbye hung between them like an invisible curtain. Yet, though they no longer sat under the jacaranda tree, their hearts clung desperately to the memory of their promise, even as the world tried to pry it from their grasp. Every day, as Kwame drove through the city's tangled streets, he found himself haunted by memories of Amma. Sometimes, in the rearview mirror, he would imagine her sitting in the back seat, her kind eyes watching him with that same gentle smile she had carried since childhood. At times, when the road was quiet, he would whisper her name softly, "Amma, are you there?" And though only the hum of the engine replied, he felt for a fleeting moment as though she could hear him. His passengers came and went, each carrying a story that brushed against his own. The young woman nervously rehearsing for a job interview, the old man clutching flowers for his sick wife, the group of school children giggling over tattered books as they piled into the back. Kwame smiled politely, sometimes even laughed with them, but when the taxi emptied, the silence returned, pressing on his heart like a weight he could no longer ignore. One rainy morning, he picked up a woman whose basket brimmed with golden mangoes, their fragrance sweet and strong even through the damp air. She chatted about her children, her voice laced with pride, and when she asked him if he had a family of his own, his throat tightened as he answered softly, "Just a sister, though I hardly see her now." The woman looked at him with a mixture of kindness and sorrow, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, and said words that would echo in his mind long after she left. "Don't let silence steal love. Families are like roots. If you forget to water them, the tree will still stand, but it will wither inside." That night, long after the city had quieted, Quaim sat in his taxi staring at the carved wooden dove Amma had given him on his 18th birthday. He remembered her tying it around his neck, her voice full of warmth as she whispered, "Whenever you feel lost, let this remind you that you have a home in my heart." For the first time in many years, Quaim allowed tears to slip down his cheeks, silent testaments to the love he had left, untended silent goodbyes he had given without words. And the aching truth that he had let life as demands carve a canyon between him and the sister who had once been his entire world. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Amma sat alone in her small classroom, the chalkboard behind her smudged with the day's lessons, her hands coated with chalk dust, her heart heavy with memories. She thought of Quaim often, wondered if he was eating well, if he still wore the carved dove she had given him, if he still remembered the Sundays beneath the jacaranda tree. Sometimes she walked past the taxi stand where he once waited her steps, slow with hope and dread, searching the rows of yellow cars for a glimpse of his familiar smile, only to return home with her heart heavier than before. At night, when the city finally grew quiet, she would lie awake whispering his name into the darkness, as though the wind itself might carry her voice through the streets to find him. Their lives moved like parallel rivers, close enough to sense each other's flow, yet never touching, each current pulling them further from the shore where they once stood together. Yet, through every missed Sunday, through every silent goodbye, Amma too clung to hope, fragile but unbroken, that one day they would find their way back. It was on a Saturday evening, after another long day of endless rides, that Quaim picked up a passenger who asked to be dropped near the jacaranda tree. At the mention of the place, his chest tightened, memories rushing over him like a sudden storm. As he parked, he saw children playing beneath the purple blossoms, their laughter ringing through the twilight air, and for a moment, it felt as though time had folded back upon itself, carrying him once again to the days of roasted maize and whispered promises. He sat there, watching them, his hands trembling on the steering wheel, his heart aching with the weight of what he had lost, until he whispered, barely audible even to himself, "Amma, I miss you." For the first time in years, the decision came to him with a clarity as sharp as the evening air. The silence had lasted long enough. He started the taxi, pointing it toward Amma's neighborhood, his chest heavy with fear of rejection, yet lightened by the fragile hope that perhaps, after all the taxi rides and all the silent goodbyes, there could still be a hello waiting for him at the end of the road. In the quiet of that evening, as the city's restless streets softened under the purple haze of the setting sun, Quaim drove his battered taxi toward Amma's neighborhood, his heart pounding like the drumbeats of the harvest festivals they had once danced to as children. Each turn of the wheel pulling him closer to the sister whose absence had weighed upon him like an unhealed wound. Each passing streetlight illuminating the memories that had slept too long in the shadows of silence. He had not stood before her in years, not since their Sunday meetings had faded into silence, and as he drew nearer, fear and hope wrestled inside him, leaving his palms damp against the steering wheel and his breath shallow, for he wondered whether she would welcome him with the warmth of old promises or look upon him with the coldness of disappointment. When he finally turned the corner to the small street where her humble home stood, he stopped the taxi a short distance away, staring at the familiar, Jacaranda blossoms that had fallen across her doorstep, their purple petals carpeting the ground like the offerings of ancestors who had heard his whispered prayers. For a long moment, he sat frozen, the hum of the engine filling the silence he feared to break, until he forced himself to step out, his legs trembling, his hand clutching the carved wooden dove that had been his silent companion through the years. With each step toward her door, memories flooded back, Amma laughing as she chased him across the red dust of their childhood village, Emma's gentle hands tying the dove around his neck, Emma's tear-filled eyes the day they buried their parents, Emma's voice promising that no matter how hard life became, they would never let the city steal the bond they shared. He raised his hand to knock, then faltered, overcome by the thought that perhaps too much time had passed, that the silent goodbyes had already spoken more loudly than any words he could bring. But before his courage could fail him, the door creaked open, and there she stood, Amma, her hair tied back in the simple scarf she always wore when teaching, her eyes tired from long days but still carrying the same gentle light that had once guided him through darkness. For a heartbeat, they both stood in stunned silence, their eyes locked, their breaths shallow, as though the years between them had collapsed into this single moment. Then, as if drawn by a force greater than their fear, Amma stepped forward, her lips trembling, her eyes glistening, and whispered his name, Quaim. The sound of it broke him, and before he could speak, tears blurred his vision, his voice cracking as he managed to choke out, Amma, I'm sorry. In an instant, she closed the distance, wrapping her arms around him, holding him as though she would never let go again, her tears falling against his shoulder, his arms clutching her with the desperation of a man who had wandered too long without home. For a while, they said nothing, letting their embrace speak the words silence had stolen from them, the jacaranda blossoms falling gently around them like blessings from the heavens. When at last Amma pulled back, she touched the wooden dove in his hand, her fingers trembling as she smiled through tears. You still have it, she whispered. Quaim nodded, his voice thick with emotion. It was all I had left of us. Every time I thought I had lost myself, I held it, and I felt you near. She led him inside, the small room warm with the scent of stew simmering on the fire, the chalkboard leaning against the wall still bearing the day's lessons, the simple wooden table covered with exercise books marked in her neat handwriting. They sat together, side by side, and for the first time in years they spoke, not of the silence that had divided them, but of the memories that still bound them. Quaim told her of the countless rides, of the faces that had passed through his taxi, of the nights he had whispered her name into the rearview mirror. Amma told him of the children she taught, of the evenings she had walked to the taxi stand hoping to see him, of the prayers she had whispered into the night. Their words flowed like the river after the rains, unstoppable, filling the emptiness that had grown between them, washing away the dust of the years apart. They laughed through tears, remembering their grandmother's stories, their parents' gentle hands, their childhood games under the acacia tree. And as the night deepened, the silence that had once suffocated them dissolved, replaced by the warmth of voices long denied. Days turned into weeks, and though Quaim still drove his taxi, he now made it a ritual to end his day by stopping at Amma's home. Sometimes he would arrive tired, his clothes dusted with the city's weariness, but Amma always welcomed him with food, with laughter, with the reminder that love was a greater nourishment than any meal. On weekends they returned together to the jacaranda tree, no longer just a place of memory but a place of rebirth, sitting beneath its blossoms while Amma read stories to the neighborhood children and Quaim handed out roasted maize to the little ones who gathered eagerly at his side. The city, once a place that had stolen their closeness, now became the canvas on which they painted their reunion. Their neighbors began to notice. The taxi driver who once wore only silence now laughed often. The teacher whose eyes had carried hidden sorrow now walked with a lightness that made others smile. And though life remained demanding, though the city still roared with its endless rhythm, Quame and Amma had reclaimed the promise they had made beneath their grandmother as acacia tree, that no matter how far life carried them, no matter how heavy the world became, they would not let it break the bond of love that made them whole. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and the jacaranda blossoms glowed in the soft orange light, Quame sat with Amma under the tree, the carved wooden dove resting between them. He turned to her, his voice gentle but certain. "Amma, I thought I had lost you to the silence, but now I know the truth. Love doesn't disappear. It only waits for us to find our way back." Amma smiled, her hand resting on his. "And we always will," she whispered. Above them, the blossoms swayed in the evening breeze, and for the first time in years, the silence carried not sorrow but peace. Moral: no distance, no silence, and no hardship can break the bond of true family love. When we choose to return, to speak, and to hold each other again, we find that love has been waiting for us all along, patient, enduring, and stronger than the silence that tried to divide us.